In today's episode, John Rodgers and I discuss our favorite paints and stains. And later, architect Katelyn Parker explains how architects can help old house owners make sympathetic changes for modern life. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year, 2022. Dare we even hope for something new this year? I don't know. Life has been so strange since 2020, but I guess that ability to hope, it belongs to us and it's personal. So I guess I say go for it. Let's just go for it. We're going to throw a bunch of good stuff out into the universe and just see what happens. I mean, at this point, why not? It's worth a try. I do have one announcement today, and that is that this season is almost over. The last episode is Monday, January 17th, and then I'll be on a short break until season 7 of True Tales from Old Houses starts on Monday, February 28th. I'm currently booking interviews for the season, so if you know of someone who would be an excellent guest, please let me know. You can feel free to reach out via social media, the contact form on the website, email, whatever. Make it easy on yourself. I'll get it, I'm sure. And if you think that excellent guest could be you, then go ahead and fill out the guest intake form on the website at truetalesfromoldhouses.com, and we'll follow up from there. In other news, there are a few things going on here in Blake Hill House. First, we're finally at the stage where the contractors are putting the guest bathroom back together, and that feels like such a big deal. This whole project has been going in fits and starts due to so many things. I mean, truly nothing out of the ordinary. But it is nice to see regular forward momentum at this point. I'm also making really good progress on the staircase restoration. My friend Dale has completely saved me by doing a ton of paint stripping on the balusters. If you've ever done this kind of work, you know that it is no fun at all. He's a saint, really. There's no other word for him. He's a saint. We're on the last 9 balusters of 20, and then the next step is to repair them because half or more of them are either cracked or broken all the way through. All of the project updates are on the blog now, or they will be very soon. So if you'd like to follow along, all that good stuff is at blakehillhouse.com. And if you subscribe to the blog, updates will land right in your email inbox. Finally, it's not an announcement, but I do have a little follow-up on the Halifax explosion that I talked about during the last episode. That was episode number 67 with Joe Peterson. Joe posted a comment in the True Tales from Old Houses Facebook group, and I wanted to share it with all of you. And by the way, if you are welcome to join that Facebook group, I often post extra photos there that don't make it on the show notes, and I share interesting info related to the Old House community or past episodes, just things like that. And I'll link to that group right in the show notes. Anyway, here's Joe's comment. I'm just going to read it. He wrote, "Immediately following the explosion, the city of Boston, Massachusetts sent aid to the people of Halifax. Beginning in 1941, a tree was lit in the city in honor of Boston. And beginning in 1971 and continuing to this day, a huge Christmas tree is harvested in Nova Scotia and transported to Boston, accompanied by officials from Halifax and erected in the Boston Common as a thank you." I had no idea. Isn't that so nice? I didn't know that Boston sent help to Halifax in the first place, and I certainly wasn't aware that there was such a strong connection between the cities after all these years. I just thought that was a great story. To keep this going, I would really like to hear from someone in Boston. Do you know about this tree? I guess I'm wondering if the Christmas tree in Boston Common and the Halifax explosion, is that still part of your local lore? And is visiting the tree a tradition that you participate in or follow? Please send me a message and let me know. I'd like to hear from you. And thank you so much for that added information, Joe. My guest today for Q&A is John Rodgers from Phoenix Preservation. Hi, John.
Hello. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I feel the need to tell everyone who's listening here that you're actually sitting in your truck. You took this call on the side of the road. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, not a problem. It's probably the warmest I'm going to be all day today.
What are you working on today?
I'm inside on windows, luckily. The downside is that as soon as you get the window pulled out of the opening, then it it's got that vacuum. So it's nothing but cold air sucking in.
There's something about the bitter cold in northern Missouri too. It just feels colder to me.
It's different, and it's not. I always said it's a dry cold compared to the wet cold in Louisiana that kind of gets under your skin. But really, once you're under 32 degrees, it all just feels pretty miserable.
Hopefully, we can answer this question and get you back on the road to work.
Sounds good. I'll try my best.
All right. So you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Today's question is, what is your favorite paint for indoor projects, and what is your favorite type of stain? You want to start?
So I think the biggest thing for me is there's no, I mean, even with restoration in general, there's no one correct answer. There's different variations and so many different things you have to take into account. If we're talking wall painting interior, I prefer to lean towards the Limewash side of paint. And it's just, I focus on windows now, but for so many years I was doing traditional plaster, whether it was repair or new install of, 3-coat lime plaster. And it never made sense to me to put the effort and put the money into using those breathable products. And then you're like, okay, this is a perfectly restored, breathable plaster wall. Let's cover it with latex paint, which as soon as you do that, it's not breathable anymore. So at that point, you might as well have just done drywall. Whereas the Limewash is, you still get the color. It doesn't look the same as, latex paint, but you get color on the walls and it maintains the integrity of the product. It's still breathable. It's still fire resistant and mold resistant and everything else.
Can you take just a second to tell listeners what Limewash is?
Yeah, essentially Limewash is, I guess the best way to describe it is it's almost like a watered down paint. It's a mixture of water, lime, whether it's, powdered lime or lime putty, and pigments. And that's how you would get basically color on the walls. True lime plaster is a very bright white, which is gorgeous in itself, but you want to get some color on the walls, and a way to do that is by adding pigments to it. It paints on very, very liquidy. It takes multiple layers, but then it comes up with a gorgeous matte, kind of a matte finish to it that maintains the feel and the integrity of the plaster. It still allows moisture and air to pass through.
Can you color over it? Like if you color one, or make it gray and you don't like it, you'd rather have it orange. I mean, can you paint over Limewash with more Limewash, or do you need to do something like a white Limewash in between?
No, I think you can go over. They're obviously going to interact. So, remembering the color wheel from elementary school, if you have, yellow walls and you add red, it's probably going to come out orangish at first, and it'll get more red the more layers you put on it. It'll slowly build up in layers. You could always do a skim coat of a finish coat of plaster over the top if you just wanted to start with white again. But Limewash is definitely my preference for plaster walls. If we're talking trim and everything else, I'm partial to the oil paint, which I know a lot of the country can't get anymore. But it's just an oil primer with an acrylic top coat is the best finish in my mind in terms of longevity and how it looks. They go together very nicely.
I think they work really well together too. And I believe that all 50 states I think you can get oil primer in all of the states. It's the oil paint that's the sticking point in certain locations.
Okay. And I think even in some locations, you can still get the oil paint, but it's only like in quart jars or, smaller quantities. Whereas the Midwest, we still believe in oil, and you can get it in 5-gallon jugs.
This does not surprise
me. Right. Knock on wood, it'll stay like that.
Right. I live in New York and I can get it in the quarts. And I like it too. One of the dilemmas I have with using it, and Steve Jordan and I talked about the same thing, is that when you use oil paint, you can't guarantee that the person coming along behind you will also use oil paint. And then they're going to have an issue with their latex not adhering to oil unless they use a proper bonding primer. And a lot of people don't know that. So I'm always afraid to use oil paint. It does smell terrible too. Like you really need some ventilation with that. So aside from the VOCs and actually just the health hazards of using oil paint, I just have concerns about the next person coming along and what they're going to do and how that's going to affect the longevity of woodwork. Because sometimes people don't have the patience to strip it back and correct their mistake. They're just going to pull it out and start over.
Right, absolutely. And that's why I think that's kind of a safety net, doing the oil primer with the acrylic top coat, because you you give that next person a chance to, to not have to double up their work and peel everything back off and start over. You're getting that strong bond between the oil paint and the bare wood. And then you can finish it with, I keep saying acrylic, it's latex. But that way the next person behind you can just come back with latex, which is what they're 9 times out of 10 going to go with. And it's not going to just fall off the wall.
I did a whole episode with Scott Seidler. It was an entire paint episode, and we talked about modern paints and what's the difference between latex and acrylic and alkyd and his favorites and whatnot. And I just thought we could talk about it again, just between you and I, like what would we use? What would we use on our houses? I also did a separate episode with Natalie from Earth and Flax, and she talked all about linseed oil paints and pine tar. So we have talked a lot about paint on this show. But as you said, there are different paints for different applications. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right. Scott and Natalie were both, the amount of knowledge they fit into their brains is incredible. So it'll be a good change for the listeners, because they got all the technical information from them, and then they can listen to me. And I think red's a pretty color.
I like red too, John.
It's a horrible color to paint with, but it's beautiful when it comes out after 30 coats.
Yeah, I know. I have a red front door, and I'm thinking it took 5 coats. And after a while, I was thinking, I don't really want to put any more paint on this door. I'm building up a whole coat of something new here that I don't want to just keep building it up, because that's the dilemma you get on woodwork, where you start to lose the details.
But it's so gorgeous. Every time I do it, I swear I'm never going to do it again. And then I see it in its finished state and I forget everything it took to get there. So I do it again in a different shade of red.
I know. Red's one of my favorites too. So how about stain? And you're the better person to talk to about this than I, because I don't use a lot of stains. My woodwork in my house was all paint grade fir, Doug fir. My woodwork's been painted since the beginning, with a very few exceptions here and there. So I haven't really had to come up with stain, except for just a few maybe pieces I got from Goodwill, that I stripped and stained or something, but certainly nothing restoration quality.
Right. And in terms of stain, and my general go-to is to just keep things simple. There's some incredible product lines from different manufacturers that are, top-notch, top shelf in terms of price, that are absolutely gorgeous. My biggest problem using those is some places don't have a big box store, within miles. So my biggest fear, and it's happened a couple of times, it happened recently in North Louisiana, is what happens if you run out? You're using one of those unique, not off the shelf products, and you can't get any more in a pinch. So I try to keep it simple. And things that you can find at your local hardware store or at your local big box store, which I try to avoid big box in general, but things that are easy to find if your technique is done right, and the wood is clean, the sanding's been done to the right grit, you can get a quality finish, and it's going to last more than doing an improper prep work, and you're using, stain that's $100 a quart. Just
right.
I like to keep it, and I don't know if we want to name drop or not, but things like the Limewash product line and things like that, they're okay stains, but the quality is there if you do the prep first, and then you get a good protective urethane on it, or a spar varnish, something to protect the stain. My one tried and true rule is I avoid anything that's a mix, whether it's paint and primer in one can or stain and poly in one can. You can't ever be good at both. It's like going out to eat and the place sells hamburgers and pizza. It's two completely opposite things.
Right. One's going to be better than the other. So, and I did speak out of turn, because I said, what do you recommend for restoration? And of course, for restoration, it'd probably be shellac and dye, not any of these things that we're talking about, right. But I guess for rehabbing, and a lot of people do use
right. And shellac's another excellent one, because you can find shellac flakes in an endless amount of colors. The issue is if you have different crafts working on different parts of the house, trying to get that, it's not really chemistry, but trying to get one person compared to 2 or 3 people to mix it exactly the same to where it comes out the same is near impossible. So,
right.
You can get the same effect with stains and then use a clear shellac off the shelf. Ideally, it'd be unwaxed, but if it has to be waxed, because typically that's what's on the shelf, then you'll still get a good finish. It'll still be shellac. It's just not the same as mixing your own out of flakes.
Well, we just kind of touched on this, just a brief discussion about it. Wanted to say thanks for taking the time to park your truck on the side of the road and have this conversation with me.
Glad I was able to find a shoulder.
Finding a shoulder, for people who don't know, shoulders don't seem to be a major thing in Missouri for some reason, at least in rural Missouri. The roads kind of just go right off into the culverts, as we call them there. So yeah, finding a shoulder is a thing in itself.
We don't believe in safety here.
Oil paints, no shoulders on the road. You're just taking your life into your own hands there.
Absolutely. It's the survival of the fittest, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I will talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
As always, if you have a DIY or old house question that you would like to submit for listener Q&A, please send it via the contact form at truetalesfromoldhouses.com, and we'll answer it on an upcoming episode. Now it is my turn to ask you something, and that is, what is your favorite thing about living in an old house, or what is the most challenging thing about living in an old house? I've been asking that same question all season, and here is an answer from Chad. Chad has an interesting take on this question. He wrote, I don't do well with blank slates. Building on good architecture can help me figure out what to do. That makes sense. And something Chad finds challenging is that the house requires expensive materials, so the repairs and changes are as good as the original. This kind of work really is a double-edged sword, isn't it? I'll be sharing your answers through the final episode of this season, and then we'll have a new question for season 7. So submit your answers through the website, or you're welcome to send me a message on Instagram or Facebook. So again, right now, the question is, what is your favorite thing about living in an old house, or what is the most challenging thing about living in an old house? And thank you for your answers, Chad. It is time to thank our sponsors. This show simply could not happen without them. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and the Plunger app. The Window Course is a step-by-step, do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It's self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. Make taking the Window Course part of your New Year's resolution and get a jump on all of that window restoration work you have on your to-do list. Now is the perfect time to take the course and learn the process. Make a plan, gather supplies, and you will be ready when the weather turns warm. Here's another little something Scott is offering his students. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the Training Package, then you'll get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. The Window Course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've still got a coupon code for you too. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by the Plunger app, whose mission is to solve 100% of plumbing problems that don't require an on-site plumber. The Plunger app is free to download. Open the app on your phone or tablet, click Talk to a Plumber Now, and you'll be connected with a licensed plumber in your area who will help you troubleshoot and solve your plumbing problem with a face-to-face video chat. Now, I'm in charge of some of the finished plumbing in our guest bath, and I will definitely be using help from a pro at Plunger. Subcontractors are so busy these days, and what I love is that I can use the app on my schedule. I'll pick a day, and when I get stuck, and I know I will, I'll call Plunger, and a plumber will talk me through the work for a fraction of the cost of hiring a plumber to come to my house to do it. And if you need parts, Plunger can ship everything you need right to your front door. Plunger truly is plumbing for the people. So here's what you need to know. Download the free Plunger app at plunjr.com/download. Tap Talk to a Plumber Now to solve your problem. It's that easy. And if you mention the True Tales from Old Houses secret word flapper, your first call is only $10. Use the secret word flapper to save, and be sure to tell them that I sent you. My guest today is Katelyn Parker. Katelyn has been an architect for over 12 years. In 2020, she struck out on her own and started Bungalow Roots, an architectural firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I am Katelyn Parker. I am an architect in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I own an old house. I've owned it for 10 years, and I started my business last year as Bungalow Roots Architecture, but I am also Bungalow Roots on Instagram.
Wonderful. Hi, Katelyn. Welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you here.
Awesome. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and it's funny. It happens from time to time. I think, I need to have, so and so on the show, and then time just stretches out, and I think, it's only been a month or two, but it's probably been 2 years, I think, since we've talked about having you on the show. So I'm glad you're here.
Probably. Honestly, this year doesn't even, how is it almost over? What happened?
Right. I think the sad fact too is that 2022 is not going to be a whole lot different.
I know.
All right. Well, I want to start our time together by asking you a very basic, we're talking super basic question. And I would say that most of us are aware of why architects are essential for new builds and for commercial properties. But how do architects help homeowners, specifically for remodeling or additions?
So a lot of my job is helping people figure out what they need. That is where an architect is really, really helpful in a renovation or an addition, because you think you just need a master bedroom, or you think you just need whatever, but I can help you get to the core of your needs. So I spend a ton of time in the programming phase, which is the phase where we ask a bunch of questions that seem really personal. And why do you need to know that? But it gets to the basis of how you live in your house and how you want to live in your house in the future, so that we can plan for long-term and also short-term. So I just need a master bath now, but I might want this in the future. So then we have to think about, okay, how do we do this phase one, possibly phase two project? So that's where an architect is really great. We're your advocate. We are there to help you figure out what you need with no real agenda other than helping you. Builders are great, but they have an agenda, which is to get the job done. They don't want to think about the next thing that you might do in 10 years. They want to do what they need to do right now. So that's why an architect is great to have around.
Right. And I know that I feel like I'm starting at square one here with that question, but I think a lot of us, we think we can do it all. We don't need an architect. And I would say that sometimes there was one time where I was considering a large scale project, and I found myself wondering, do I need an architect or an engineer or both? What makes an architect different from an engineer?
The architect is kind of the manager of the whole thing. An engineer does a very specific task. They are going to do the math to figure out how the structure will work. And I actually work very closely with a lot of engineers, but they're not going to plan out the form or the shape or what the addition or whatever you're adding on looks like. That is the job of the architect. The architect is there for the aesthetic decisions, but they're also there for some of the structural decisions. I will do a structural diagram basically and hand that to the engineer and say, this is what I'm thinking. Am I crazy? And how big do you think this beam needs to be?
Okay. So I was going to ask you if there's overlap. Do you always get along? What happens if the architect and the engineer don't agree?
Well, we usually work it out. And honestly, I've never had a situation where the engineer was like, no, you can't do that. I'd be like, and usually it's a compromise. So I'll be like, I only have 14 inches of depth for this beam. Can you make it work? And the engineer will go, no. And then it'll be something else. Either I need to change the way the structure lays out, or it needs to be a steel beam, or, there's a whole lot of balancing in structure.
Sure. Okay.
Which is so funny because my head is on this because I've been doing structural plans all day.
And I wasn't actually looking for any drama there. I just was really curious how you work together, because I think sometimes a homeowner says, I definitely want this. And then you as the architect have to say, well, how about this? And then the engineer might come in and say, how about something even a little more different? So how do you jump through those steps to get back to the homeowner and make them happy? Is it usually just a matter of explaining, look, physics?
It is, honestly. It's a matter of explaining physics and how just how it works. Like I can't make it do that, but I can get you really close or something to that effect. But yeah, and honestly, there are so many tools and structure that you can pretty much do whatever. The only thing I can't do is make a building float.
Not even with really big magnets?
I mean, maybe, but I think the engineer would really argue with me on that one.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Well, with the basics of that out of the way, why don't you tell us about what drew you to architecture as a career? And I wondered if you have always been a lover of old houses.
When I was a kid in high school, I took a drafting class and it was just available through the high school. And we were drawing basic drawings, floor plans, elevations, or whatever. And one of the tasks in that was to design a house. And I loved it. I loved it so much, which is when I decided that, hey, that's what I could do with the rest of my life. So then I went to school, and I went to school at a really great school where we got to go to school for half of the year. And then we were working in the field for half of the year. So I got a taste of all kinds of architecture. I worked in all sorts of firms. I worked for a firm that just did a bunch of schools. I worked for a firm that did houses. I did work for one residential firm while I was in school. And I fell in love with residential architecture. So I was like, this is what I'm going to do, which is a little bit weird as an architect. Like it kind of gets frowned on, which is funny because I think more than half of us do residential.
I have to ask, why is it frowned upon? Is this like the bargain basement of architecture work?
People think it's easy, or, commercial architects tend to think that residential architecture is easy because it's a smaller project. But I find it's actually much more complicated and difficult because I have control of all of the parts. I have control of the HVAC, the electrical. I place the plumbing. Like I have to manage. And because it's small enough, I can do that. If it's a commercial project, that gets broken up into itty bitty pieces. There's an engineer who just does this thing, and they don't even have to talk to the architect. They just kind of do it. And, there's an HVAC engineer who just does his plan, and you hand it out to a bunch of consultants and a bunch of people within the firm, even because it's such a big project. One person can't do it alone.
Right. Is there an ego attached to this? It just made me think about, sometimes the commercial buildings were like, oh, that's a so-and-so building. He designed that or she designed that. And but when you come to a house, people usually don't do that. It's like, oh, there's Katelyn's house. That's where she lives. Not like who designed it or who built it in the back or whatever. Yeah.
And you do kind of leave your ego out of it when it's residential architecture, which is another reason I think it kind of gets frowned on. It doesn't get published as much. It's much more, everyman. Which is what I loved about it. In school, they're like, you want to do the biggest, best thing, you want to change the world. And you can't really change the world one house at a time, but you can make a family's life a lot better. So
yeah, I was going to say that's a good change. Sure.
Yeah, that's a good change. So anyway, I decided out of school that I wanted to do residential architecture. And I, at the time, was not, old houses weren't even on my radar. I tell this story. We went to Newport, Rhode Island when I was in grad school. And I went through all of those wonderful old houses and I didn't pay attention to them and it kills me. I was just like, cool, old houses, whatever. So then through some trials and tribulations, we ended up in Tulsa for work because I graduated in 2008 and the recession. So
oh yeah, enough said. We understand.
Moving all over the country for jobs, moved here for a job. And we were here for 6 months and we bought this house, this really cool old house, designed by an architect. So I was like, I loved the features of the house. I loved the character it had. I had no idea what I was getting into. I was like, oh yeah, we'll be young, dumb me was like, we'll be done with this in 2 years. And it's been 10 and we're repainting the house currently.
Sure. Yeah, we've all been there, done that. We know exactly how that feels.
So when I bought the old house and got into it and started to learn about it and started to learn about how to do preservation, like I did a wood window workshop with the father of all preservation, Bob Yap. And actually I did 3 workshops with him, maybe 4.
Did you go to the Belvedere School? Did you go to Missouri for the workshops?
No. So our local preservation board, Tulsa Preservation Commission, brought him in yearly with state money for preservation. And he would do these workshops for like 4 or 5 years in a row. It was fantastic. And I missed that. But, he came and he did, I think the first year we were here in May. So we bought the house in like February. So in May was the first time I went to a window restoration workshop. And then he came back the next year. And I think he did storm windows at some point. I did a window workshop refresher with him at some point, and I did passive floor restoration with him. Bob Yap preaches preservation, and he had me.
Right.
So I just dug into all of the detail that is wonderful old houses. And in my day job for the last 10 years, I had been doing very highly detailed, high-end residential architecture, big multi-million-dollar projects. There was a project where we did a staircase where I drew all of the balusters, and it's all like hand-turned oak and like just incredible, like good old house stuff. But that staircase cost more than my house to build. So I got an appreciation for the detail in my day job also, but working on my old house taught me how old houses were built and that they were built better and built to last 110 years or more.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. As an architect, what do you see in old houses that truly sets them apart from new builds, even those high-end custom homes?
It's the craftsmanship, honestly. And I think they were built in a time, and I don't want to knock any contractors. They have a job to do, but they were built in a time when builders cared about how they built. They really cared how things went together. They were built with materials we cannot get. Like, we can't get the wood. It just doesn't exist in that capacity. The studs are just sponges compared to what old houses are built with. So the quality of the materials is much higher than you can even buy in the multi-million-dollar houses today. And they were built to adapt. They were built to be repaired, not thrown away.
Sure.
So, and new houses, they serve a purpose, but usually they're slapped together.
Right. So I would say depending on the circumstances. I mean, I've worked with quite a few contractors over the years, and I would say a lot of them, they care, but time is of the essence in a way that maybe it wasn't way back when. I mean, you've got craftsmanship. You have people who knew how to do things back then that simply are not shared with modern day builders. But likewise, I think just everybody's in a hurry. The faster you build it, the faster you can sell it, and the faster you can make money, and then turn it around to make more money, and just on and on and on. Would you agree with that? You said not to knock builders, and that's I'm not either. So, but it made me think of that. Time is really one of the main factors that's different now. Yeah,
time and money are usually the main factors. And there's a lot more mass-produced items than there were when houses were built 100 years ago. There's nobody that does plaster anymore, like especially plaster on lath like it was done in old houses. It's all sheetrock because it's faster and cheaper. Right.
So when you say no one does plaster, to clarify, you mean nobody would choose that as their first... As a new build product, they might choose.
Probably not, unless they're just nuts. I would love to do it. Like, I would just love to do it, but it's not normal for that to happen. And when plaster is done, it is occasionally done in new builds. The substrate is different.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I do know some plaster restoration professionals. That's why I want to say that. I'm like, wait, I know some people are doing it, but you're right. As a first line of building, people probably wouldn't choose plaster and lath over.
Well, and it's expensive. You bring them in for the special thing. You don't bring them in to just do production houses. Like, they're craftspeople, and there are very limited amount of those people, and it's hard to get. You can't put that many those craftspeople on production projects.
Right, definitely. So in January of last year, is that correct? Oh, January of this year, you started your own firm, Bungalow Roots.
I did.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a wild year.
I bet. Did you decide to sort of niche down into working on more old houses? I mean, obviously you got to make a living, so you got to do what comes your way. But do you intend to or hope to spend more time helping people in old houses?
I do. I love old houses. I love the people that love old houses are my people. And yes, I am trying to niche down to do that. I also do new construction with a bent more towards making it last like an old house does. Like I want it to be built well, to be maintainable, to be, it's not going anywhere, to be adaptable like an old house is built. But I also really enjoy working with people who have old homes, homeowners who are just lost and don't know how to manage their crazy old house. I've had at least 3 people in Tulsa who have found me either through Instagram or contacts who've been like, I have an old house, please help.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So now that you know more about old houses, what are some of the drawbacks maybe of old house layouts, and how do you work with them or around them for modern times?
So, old houses are always quirky. And typically they've had some kind of remodel done or remodeling done. It just depends on how original it is or how much has been done. Challenges of like houses built 100 years ago, they typically had 1 bathroom. They had very small closets. Usually they have a kitchen that was very small and laid out very differently from how we cook. And that kitchen has probably been updated. That bathroom has probably been updated. But so the challenge is finding places to add those things that people want to have slightly more workspace in their kitchen or slightly more storage in their closets or additional bathrooms. Usually that's the biggest one is I need another bathroom, please.
Sure.
And also I like to help people realize the value of what they have. If there are original character defining features like old windows, I'm going to advocate that those stay. And I will spend my time to teach you how to rehab it just so it doesn't get thrown away. But yeah, that's basically the challenge is just figuring out how to make an old house work for modern life without destroying the character of the old house.
Well, and my next question for you is going to be where you live there in Tulsa. Do you have a hard time trying to convince people, or I guess I should say gently nudge them into keeping original features?
Thankfully, the people that have found me have been committed to it. As a whole, I think Tulsa maybe doesn't value it as much, but there are some hardcore people who definitely do. But I spend a lot of time with my clients explaining why it's a good thing, explaining why you might not want that kitchen to be an open plan kitchen. Like having your kitchen in a different space is really great. Honestly, you can make a mess and just walk away from it and go have dinner in your dining room and not look at the mess, or you cook something stinky and your whole house doesn't smell that way. Helping them appreciate the value of the things that their old house has is, I think, a good way to get people to realize, hey, this is great. Instead of just looking at it and go, oh, these old windows are so leaky, I don't need them anymore, let's just put new in. Like, but no, look, wavy glass, you need to keep them.
So I have to ask, where do these people tuck this extra bathroom? Where does this go? I've been looking at a lot of real estate in Salt Lake City lately, and there's a ton of 3-1s or 4-1s, and I'm thinking, where do people put that extra bathroom? If you have 4 bedrooms, I'm thinking, 1 bedroom could maybe become a bathroom,
right?
But you don't want to take a bedroom away from a 3-bedroom house and add another bathroom.
It really depends on the floor plan of the house, because sometimes I can shoehorn one in somewhere in a place you wouldn't expect. Maybe just a half bath, like under a staircase. I've seen that a lot. Sometimes you'll add on outside of the house in a minimal way. I actually have plans for my own house. We have a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. So I have plans for my own house to add a second bathroom, which works with the architecture of the house. So I just will bring a gable up and come down again, box a small place out. But when you start going outside of the bounds, it gets more expensive. You just have to plan for it.
I was in this little retrofitted place in Ireland, and they had added bathrooms to all of these old, at one time it was a boarding house. So I'm sure there was a shared bath, but somehow they put these bathrooms in there, and they were so narrow that they had a little sink that couldn't have gone out any further than maybe, 8 or 9 inches. But you also couldn't bend over to spit out your toothpaste. You had to do some sort of squat, all the way down to just spit your toothpaste into the sink. It's the smallest bathroom I ever saw. I will never forget that. It was hilarious. I mean, if you leaned forward, you would bash your head on the mirror in front of you. So there was no way. Yeah.
And those little sinks do make those powder baths really attainable, but you probably wouldn't want to brush your teeth in.
Well, and the flip side of that too is that in my head, I always think you need so much more space to make a room. Sometimes I've seen somebody's framed house or something and they think, oh, this is the bathroom. And in my head, I'm thinking that is so small. But the truth is, it's really not, because once everything gets in there, it all fits. It's just something that I cannot visualize at all just from seeing framing.
Yeah. Well, and framing lies to you. It either looks bigger or smaller than it is because you can see through the walls. And I hate the framing stage because I just go in and, oh my gosh, this all looks wrong. What did we do?
So when homeowners are contemplating making changes to their old houses, what do you consider a true improvement to function? Because sometimes people think they want something, but maybe they just want something that looks like what they saw on TV.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, a true improvement to function is, do you need that thing? I mean, we've lived 10 years with one bathroom. We don't really need that second bathroom. But, if our family expanded, if we had more people coming more often, having that second bathroom would be really nice. So it's about how you live in the space. Don't do what the magazine tells you or what you need to do to keep up with the Joneses or whatever. I think you do what works for you, honestly. You look at how you function in the space and decide whether it needs to change to function differently.
As an architect, do you think about resale, or is that not even on the table? It doesn't come up in your conversation with homeowners?
It does. Obviously, you don't want to put so much money into a project that if you had to sell it, you couldn't, make your money back. Or you have to do a balanced comparison of, okay, yeah, we're going to put more money into it than we could if we had to sell it tomorrow, but we're also going to live in it for the next 20 years. Like, this will improve our lives for 15, 20 years, however long you plan to stay in that house. And we do that kind of cost comparison balance of how much enjoyment are you going to get out of this addition or alteration versus how much you can sell the house for eventually. And it's always a risky situation, obviously, to do a renovation, except for right now. Apparently, everyone's doing renovations because it's so hard to buy houses. The market is completely nuts. But you really have to look at a renovation. Like, don't add a bathroom because you think you'll get better resale value out of it. Like, you're going to sell it next year. Oh, I'm going to add a bathroom because I'm going to get better resale value out of it. That's never a game you're going to win. It's going to cost more to add that bathroom than you'll get out of resale. But if you are going to live there for 5 or 10 years and you really need that other bathroom, then you have to do that based on the use you'll get out of that space versus how much it costs to do that space and how much you might sell the house for.
Yeah. Interesting. I feel like I'm hearing all of those top 10 things you can remodel now to get your money back.
Which, I mean, those are true, but they're pushing an agenda.
Of course.
They are what they are.
And I know that. I didn't want anybody to think I was coming into this believing that hook, line, and sinker. I absolutely don't. Yeah, no.
No, I didn't think you did.
But I'm just picturing, setting all of those articles on fire because probably not necessary.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So how do you suggest, these old houses are quirky. We love them. But how do you suggest people work with obsolete portions of their old houses, like telephone niches or random basement toilets, things like that?
I mean, you can use that random basement toilet or just... it's a quirky little thing in the basement. And same thing with the telephone niche. You can work that into something you do with your life. Like, I have friends who made a phone that sits in the telephone niche that their cell phone plugs into so they can pretend.
Cute.
Or, it's a place to put a pretty vase or, it is what it is. You accept the quirk for what it is, and it probably won't affect your life. If it's a major thing like the basement toilet and you just need it out of the way, you just take the toilet out.
Yeah. We do have a basement toilet. It's pretty gross.
And it's weird because I didn't think there were that many because we don't have one, but 2 of the other old houses I'm working on in Tulsa have basement toilets. Actually, 3 of them. They all do have basement toilets, which is wild to me.
I get it now, after hearing the reasons why there would be toilets in the basement. I understand it. I still think it's just so strange in the way that we all are living our lives now. We don't have people coming in from the outside and they're relegated to the basement toilet. That's just not at all how we live.
No.
So for old house owners now, what advice do you have for them if they are in the very beginning stages of planning a remodel? Let's say they bought their old house, they're coming in, and they ultimately love it, but they've got that thing in their head that things have to be different. These have to change. This is not going to work. What's your advice for them?
I mean, having lived this, I lived exactly that. We bought this old house. Before we even closed, I had plans for adding a bathroom or, making it more modern. I would 100%, if it's livable, this is always the caveat. If it is a livable house, live in it. Live in it for a while and see how you live in it and learn the house before you start planning any major renovations. You're going to find that there's some sight lines that you love, like the light from this specific window is just really great at this time of day. Or, you think you need that open concept kitchen, but you live with that closed off little kitchen for a while and you find that you love it, all of that. Live with it for a while, see how it works, and then think about how you might do renovations. And then when you get to that stage, make a list. Make a list of the things you want, make a list of the things you need and why you want them. Like what function you're trying to get out of that. It's really just that. That's what I do with people. Once we have that list, then we can start thinking about designing for that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does someone find an architect?
That is a good question. Instagram's a good place. There's actually a lot of us on there. And I'm not going to say that everyone needs an architect specifically. There is a distinction between designer and architect.
Please tell us. Let's get that figured out.
Yeah.
Right now.
So an architect, which I am, is licensed and registered within their state or within multiple states. They went to school for probably 6 years. They passed some really intense exams. There were 7 when I did it. And you also have, I call it driver's training for architects. There is a certain amount of interning where you are learning on the job hours that you have to log before you can get your license. A designer will have some of that background. They may have gone to school, they probably have experience, but they don't have that professional license and liability that an architect does. But sometimes we do the same thing, in all honesty.
Like what? Like, give me an example of when you could do the same thing.
Well, in residential, usually, you don't need a licensed architect because you don't need stamped plans.
For permits, you mean?
For permits, no. You do not need stamped plans for permits. If you have an architect do it, they will stamp it because they are legally required to do so. But most states, I think there's one state, I think it's New Jersey, do not require license stamps on plans for residential.
And I feel like we should say, be sure and check your own state, because I think in New York, maybe we are also required to have an architect for any sort of separate building, even if it's residential. Because I'm getting ready to build a garage, and I think I'm required to have an architect sign off on my plans before I can go get my permit. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Just make sure and check where you live.
Yes, definitely check local codes and regulations before you do. So that is where you would need an architect. In most states, commercial requires a licensed architect.
Sure. So what would a designer do that maybe somebody would call you over and say, I need you to do this, and you would say, like, well, a designer could also do that?
So, I mean, if we're not doing any major wall moving or additions outside of the structure, things that would require figuring out roofs, things that would require, I mean, designers can also do those things, but an architect has probably seen more structural issues. They've seen more how to deal with exterior envelope situations, and that exterior envelope, like the outside of the house, how it sheds water. I forget sometimes.
We actually have talked, if anybody's been listening for a while, we talk a lot about the envelope. So we've had several guests talk about the envelope. The envelope comes up. So yeah, you're in good company here. But I feel like I asked you that question and then I kind of pressured you. I'm not trying to talk people out of hiring you. I was just trying to get to the root of what is the same and what is different about a designer or an architect. And I think I've got it. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and when you're looking for a designer and architect, you want to find someone who knows what kind of who has done the type of project you're asking for. Because a commercial architect, while they are very good at their job, are not very good at residential.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just because they are an architect does not mean that they can deal with a house. So you really do want to find someone who specializes in residential design and or architecture. And if you can find someone who specializes in old houses and preservation, good on you.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, we are out of time today, but before I go, I have to ask you, are you wearing a True Tales from Old Houses hoodie? Oh, you are. It took me a few minutes. We're on camera, which unfortunately I don't share on the podcast quite yet. We're getting to that stage, but I could see the top of your sweatshirt. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think that she's representing. Thank you, Katelyn.
I needed to represent. I live in this. It's so soft.
So soft. All right. Well, thank you so much, Katelyn. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I appreciate you being here.
I'm so happy to finally get to talk to you.
Oh, it's great. And we will put your contact information on the show notes so people can find you on Instagram. They can find your new website. Anything else that you want people to know about you, just let me know and I'll make sure that's on the show notes. All right?
Awesome. And I promise I will eventually finish that website.
You've got a good start.
It's been a placeholder for a year.
Self-employed. I get it. All right. I'll talk to you soon, Katelyn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to my guests, John Rodgers and Katelyn Parker. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. And if you enjoy this show, please consider rating or reviewing it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorites. Ratings and reviews help listeners find us by bumping us up on the podcast listening charts. And leaving a rating or review is a super easy, non-monetary way you can support the show. So thank you. For more information about this episode, including photos, show notes, and to request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Till next time.